The rain poured down heavily, each drop hitting the old wooden house like a warning from the heavens. The wind howled, rattling the loose window panes and whipping through the empty fields surrounding the isolated home. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the very air itself. Inside the dimly lit house, the flickering oil lamp cast long, eerie shadows on the stained walls. A man, unkempt and reeking of alcohol, staggered out the back door. His bloodshot eyes burned with rage as he dragged a scrawny German shepherd out of its kennel. "You're nothing but a useless mutt. Keeping you alive is a waste of food," he roared, his voice slurred with drunken fury. With a violent swing, he brought down a thick wooden stick onto the dog's back. A sharp crack echoed through the stormy night. The dog yelped in pain, but didn't cower. Its deep brown eyes remained fixed on the man, not with fear nor anger, but with unyielding determination. Even though its left front leg had never fully healed from past beatings, it stood its ground. Just inside the house, a small boy, no older than 5, clung to the doorframe. His large eyes, brimming with tears, reflected pure terror. "Please, Dad, don't hurt him," the boy, Ethan, sobbed. The man turned, his face twisted in anger. "Shut up, I haven't even dealt with you yet." Without warning, he grabbed Ethan's frail wrist and yanked him outside. The freezing rain soaked through the boy's thin clothes in seconds, making him shiver violently. His bare feet squelched in the mud as he struggled against his father's iron grip. The dog, his name was Rex, shook off the pain and sprang forward. Every nerve in his body screamed in agony, but he didn't care. He clamped his teeth down on the man's pant leg and pulled with all his strength. "You filthy beast!" The man roared and kicked Rex hard in the stomach. The impact sent the dog flying backward, rolling through the mud. He landed with a thud, blood dripping from his old wound. And yet, he stood again, his stance unbroken. His sharp eyes locked onto Ethan's terrified face. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the gleaming blade in the man's hand. "If you want to die so badly," the man snarled, raising the knife, "I'll gladly help you." Ethan screamed. Rex didn't hesitate. He lunged, his powerful jaws sinking deep into the man's wrist. The knife slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the ground. The man bellowed in pain, his voice lost in the storm's fury. Ethan saw his chance. With all the strength his small body could muster, he tore away from his father's grasp. "Rex, run!" Rex didn't need to be told twice. He clamped his teeth onto Ethan's sleeve and pulled him toward the muddy path leading to the village. The rain blurred their vision, the cold biting deep into their bones. The road ahead was nothing but darkness and uncertainty. But Rex knew one thing for sure: they had to keep moving. Behind them, the man's voice bellowed into the night, filled with rage and madness. "You can't run from me. I'll find you. I swear I will." But Rex didn't look back. There was only one mission in his heart: keep Ethan safe, no matter the cost. The rain was relentless, hammering down on the muddy path like an unforgiving force of nature. The wind howled through the trees, bending their branches until they creaked under the strain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the desolate landscape for a brief second before darkness swallowed everything again. Ethan clung tightly to Rex's wet fur as they ran. The boy's small feet stumbled over rocks and roots, but Rex never let go of his sleeve. His strong jaws held firm, guiding the child through the treacherous night. Behind them, the sound of heavy boots sloshing through the mud sent chills down Ethan's spine. "You think you can get away from me, boy?" His father's voice bellowed through the storm. Ethan whimpered, his little chest heaving as he fought to keep running. "Rex, he's coming!" Rex let out a low growl but didn't slow down. His injured leg burned with pain, but he ignored it. He had one mission: get Ethan to safety. In the distance, the faint outline of a house emerged through the downpour. The old woman's house. Ethan gasped, hope flickering in his terrified eyes. "Rex, it's Grandma's house. We're almost there." But just as those words left his lips, a sharp sound cut through the rain, the snapping of a branch. Before they could react, something grabbed Ethan's collar from behind. "Got you." Ethan screamed as he was yanked backward. His father's powerful hands dug into his thin shoulders, hoisting him off the ground like a rag doll. Rex whirled around, teeth bared, his growl turning into a vicious snarl. The man sneered down at the dog. "You again? Fine. You want to fight? Let's finish this." With one hand still gripping Ethan, he raised his fist to strike the dog, but Rex was faster. Snap. Rex lunged, sinking his sharp teeth into the man's wrist again, this time harder than before. The force of the bite made the man howl in pain, and he instinctively let go of Ethan. The boy dropped into the mud, gasping for air. "Run!" Rex's voice, though unspoken, was clear. Ethan scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the house. His tiny legs burned with exhaustion, but he didn't dare slow down. His father roared in frustration, yanking Rex away and throwing him to the side. The dog hit the ground hard, his already wounded leg twisting at an unnatural angle. A sharp whimper escaped his throat, but Rex refused to stay down. With a pained growl, he pushed himself up, forcing his legs to move. The man was charging toward Ethan again. Rex knew he wouldn't reach the boy in time. So, he did the only thing he could. He flung himself at the man's legs, knocking him off balance. The drunken man slipped in the mud, crashing down with a thud. It was just enough time. Ethan reached the front porch of the old house and banged on the door with everything he had. "Grandma, open the door." For a terrifying second, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then, click. The door swung open. A frail but fierce old woman stood in the doorway, holding a wooden staff in one hand. Her wrinkled face was set in a deep scowl. "Ethan? What in heaven's name?" But she didn't need to finish her sentence. Her sharp eyes darted past the boy to the scene behind him. Rex, battered and bleeding, still standing his ground between Ethan and the monstrous man behind him. The man, now covered in mud, had pushed himself up, his face twisted in rage. "You old hag, stay out of this," he spat, wiping blood from his bitten wrist. "That's my son. Give him back." The old woman lifted her staff, her hand steady despite her age. "You lost the right to call him your son the moment you raised your hand against him." Her voice, though quiet, carried the weight of undeniable authority. The man snarled and took a step forward. Rex growled, his body coiled, ready to attack again. The old woman didn't flinch. Instead, she took a bold step forward and swung her staff. Whack! The wooden staff cracked against the man's ribs, making him stumble back with a cry of pain. Rex took that moment to leap forward, teeth bared, aiming straight for his attacker's throat. But the man, driven by sheer desperation, kicked out violently, striking Rex's already injured leg. The German shepherd yelped in agony, collapsing onto the ground. Ethan's scream pierced the night. "Rex!" The man, clutching his side in pain, gritted his teeth and staggered back. He glared at the old woman and the boy, then at Rex, who was still struggling to get up. Then suddenly, he turned and ran. Ethan's breath hitched. He's leaving?" The old woman narrowed her eyes. "No." She tightened her grip on the staff. "He'll be back." Ethan dropped to his knees, hands shaking as he cupped Rex's face. "Rex, please, stay with me." The dog, panting heavily, managed to lick the boy's hand weakly. His body shivered, his strength barely holding on. The old woman bent down, placing a gentle but firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We need to get him inside, child." Her voice softened. "He's hurt, but he's strong. Let's take care of him." Ethan nodded furiously, blinking away tears. Together, the two of them lifted the wounded Rex, carrying him into the house. As the storm raged on outside, Ethan's father vanished into the darkness. But the old woman was right. He would be back, and next time he wouldn't come alone. The old house creaked as the wind howled outside, rattling the wooden shutters. Inside, the dim glow of a lantern cast flickering shadows along the walls. The small room smelled of damp wood, old books, and the sharp tang of antiseptic. Ethan sat on the floor beside the bed, his small hands gripping Rex's paw. His dog, his best friend, lay on a tattered blanket, his fur still damp from the rain. His breaths were shallow but steady. The old woman, Eleanor, knelt beside them, carefully wrapping Rex's wounded leg with strips of cloth. Her aged hands worked quickly but gently, her face lined with worry. "He lost a lot of blood, but he's strong, Ethan." Her voice was soft yet firm. "He fought to protect you, and now it's our turn to help him." Ethan nodded, blinking away tears. He stroked Rex's head, feeling the warmth of his fur. "You'll be okay, won't you, Rex? You have to be." Rex let out a weak whimper, his tail twitching slightly. The boy swallowed hard. He had never felt so helpless in his life. Eleanor placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." But Ethan couldn't sleep. Even as he lay curled up on the small couch, wrapped in an old knitted blanket, his mind raced. His father would come back, and next time he wouldn't be alone. A loud clatter jolted Ethan awake. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he had dreamed it. Then, creak. Someone was outside. Ethan's heart pounded. He pushed the blanket off and sat up. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the dying lantern. Scratch. Scratch. Something scraped against the back door. Ethan's breath hitched. He turned his head toward Rex, who was still lying on the blanket. His ears twitched, but he didn't move. The old woman stirred from her chair, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You heard it too?" she whispered. Ethan nodded. Eleanor rose to her feet, grabbing her wooden staff. Slowly, she made her way toward the back door. The air was thick with tension. Ethan wanted to tell her to stop, that they should just hide, but before he could, bang, bang, bang. Someone pounded on the door. Ethan flinched. Rex lifted his head, his body trembling, but a low growl rumbled in his throat. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Who's there?" she called out. Silence. Then a voice. "It's me. Open up." Ethan's blood ran cold. His father. Eleanor didn't move. She gripped her staff tighter. "You have no right to be here. Leave." A chilling chuckle drifted through the door. "You think I'd come all this way just to leave empty-handed? You have something that belongs to me." Ethan pressed himself against the wall, his small hands clenched into fists. He was talking about him. His father's voice darkened. "Open the door, old woman, before I break it down." Rex struggled to stand, letting out a fierce growl despite his injury. Ethan's father laughed. "Still alive, huh? That mutt doesn't know when to give up. Maybe I should finish the job." Ethan's fear snapped into anger. He stood up, fists trembling. "You're not taking me," he shouted. "You're not hurting Rex." A heavy silence fell. Then the doorknob twisted violently. Eleanor acted fast. She reached into the cabinet beside her and pulled out an old shotgun. Ethan's eyes widened. "Stay behind me, child." Her voice was steel. The door shook as his father pounded on it harder. Then footsteps, moving away. Ethan held his breath, his ears straining. The silence stretched. Then, "This isn't over." The voice was distant, but it sent a chill down Ethan's spine. They waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. Eleanor lowered the shotgun with a sigh. Ethan's legs gave out, and he sank to the floor, his heart still hammering in his chest. His father was gone, for now, but he would return. And next time, they might not be able to stop him. The following morning, the storm had passed, but the sky remained dark and heavy. Eleanor wasted no time. "We need to leave." Ethan froze. "Leave? But this is your home." The old woman knelt in front of him, her gaze kind but serious. "Home is where we are safe, Ethan. This place isn't safe anymore." He wanted to argue, but deep down he knew she was right. Rex, still weak, tried to stand. His leg wobbled, but he lifted his head high. Eleanor smiled at the dog. "He won't let us go alone." Ethan stroked Rex's fur. "Of course not." They packed quickly. Eleanor filled a small bag with food, bandages, and warm clothes. Ethan's hands trembled as he tied his shoelaces. "Where will we go?" Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Somewhere far away, somewhere safe." Ethan swallowed hard. He had spent his whole life in fear, but not anymore. He wasn't running from something. He was running toward a new life. As they stepped outside, the fresh air was crisp and cool. The path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. They would not look back. The sun barely peeked through the heavy gray clouds as Ethan, Eleanor, and Rex set off. The dirt path leading out of the village was slick from last night's rain, and each step felt heavier than the last. Ethan walked close to Rex, his small hand resting lightly on the dog's back. Rex limped slightly, his injured leg still weak, but his ears were alert, his body tense as if he sensed something unseen. Eleanor, walking ahead, gripped her wooden staff tightly. "We'll take the forest path. It's longer, but safer. Your father won't expect us to go that way." Ethan nodded. He didn't trust his voice right now. He knew his father wouldn't give up easily. The wind whispered through the trees as they entered the dense forest. The towering pines swayed, their branches creaking ominously. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects, just the sound of their footsteps and Rex's soft panting. Something felt wrong. Hours passed, but the uneasy feeling in Ethan's stomach never faded. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting his father to lunge out of the trees. Then a twig snapped. Eleanor froze. Rex's fur bristled, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Ethan's heart pounded. He turned, scanning the thick trees. At first, there was nothing but shifting shadows. Then, movement. A dark figure stepped out from behind a tree. His father. Drenched, his clothes torn, his face twisted in fury. His left arm was wrapped in a crude bandage where Rex had bitten him the night before, and in his right hand, a knife. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His father's lips curled into a sneer. "Did you really think you could run from me, boy?" Eleanor took a step forward, placing herself between Ethan and the man. "You don't belong here. Leave." The man let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere without my son, and if you try to stop me, old woman." He raised the knife. Rex snarled, stepping in front of Ethan, his body tense, his teeth bared. The man's grin faded. "Still alive, huh? You should have died last night, mutt." Ethan clenched his fists. His fear was slowly turning into something else. Rage. "You're not taking me," he said through gritted teeth. "And you're never hurting Rex again." His father's eyes darkened. "Is that so?" And then, he charged. It happened in a blur. Eleanor swung her staff, aiming for the man's hand. The wood connected with his wrist, and the knife went flying into the mud. Rex lunged, his powerful jaws snapping at the man's injured arm. The man screamed, stumbling backward. He kicked out at Rex, sending the dog skidding into the dirt. Ethan ran forward without thinking. He threw himself in front of Rex, arms spread wide. "Leave him alone." His father hesitated for a split second, and that was all Eleanor needed. With surprising strength for her frail frame, she slammed her staff into his knee. His leg buckled, and he collapsed into the mud. He roared in frustration, grabbing for the knife, but Eleanor was faster. She stepped on his wrist, forcing him to stay down. "It's over," she said, her voice like steel. The man panted, his face twisted in fury. "You can't keep him from me. He's my blood, my son." Ethan's body trembled, not with fear, but with anger. He had spent his whole life scared of this man. But not anymore. He took a deep breath, then stepped forward. "You lost the right to call me your son the moment you raised your hand against me." His father stilled. Ethan lifted his chin, his voice steady. "You don't own me, and you never will." For the first time, his father looked unsure. Rex growled lowly, standing protectively beside Ethan. Eleanor sighed. "You have a choice. You can walk away now, or we can make sure you never hurt Ethan again." The man glared at them, his hands clenched into fists. Then, slowly, his shoulders slumped. "This isn't over," he muttered. But he didn't fight anymore. Instead, he turned and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the shadows. Ethan stood frozen, barely daring to breathe until the last trace of his father was gone. Then, finally, his knees gave out and he collapsed into the mud. Eleanor and Rex were beside him in an instant. The old woman placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, Ethan. He's gone." Rex nudged his cheek, letting out a soft whine. Ethan let out a shaky breath. He had won. They had won. For the first time in his life, he was free. They sat there in the forest for a long while, letting the reality settle in. Then Eleanor smiled. "Come on, let's go home." Ethan wiped his eyes and stood up. Not the home he had run from, not the one filled with pain and fear, but a real home. One where he would be safe, one where he could be happy. Rex walked beside him, his tail wagging slowly. Ethan smiled and ruffled the dog's fur. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. For the first time in forever, Ethan knew he was going to be okay. The morning sun peeked through the trees as Ethan, Eleanor, and Rex made their way back toward the village. The air was crisp and the scent of damp earth filled their lungs. Ethan walked in silence, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. His father was gone. Gone. But the fear still clung to his skin, like a shadow he couldn't shake. What if he came back? What if this peace was only temporary? A wet nose nudged his hand. Ethan looked down to see Rex, his amber eyes full of quiet understanding. The dog had saved him, again and again. Ethan's grip tightened in Rex's thick fur. "You're not leaving me, right?" he whispered. Rex let out a soft woof and pressed closer, as if to say, "Never." When they reached Eleanor's cottage at the edge of the village, exhaustion settled over Ethan like a heavy blanket. Eleanor led him inside, the warm scent of herbs and old wood wrapping around him like a hug. She gently guided him to sit by the fire, then began tending to Rex's wounds. The German shepherd lay still, only flinching slightly as Eleanor cleaned his cuts and wrapped his injured leg with practiced care. Ethan watched in silence. For the first time in his life, someone was helping instead of hurting. "He'll heal just fine," Eleanor reassured him, tying off the last bandage. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. He reached out, running his fingers through Rex's fur. "You're a fighter, buddy." Rex thumped his tail against the wooden floor, eyes half-lidded but full of trust. Eleanor settled into her chair, watching them. "And what about you, Ethan? Where will you go now?" Ethan hesitated. He had never had a choice before. But now, he did. He looked around the small cottage, at the books stacked on the shelves, the warm glow of the fire, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. He looked back at Eleanor. "Can I stay?" he asked hesitantly. Eleanor's lips curled into a gentle smile. "As long as you like." Something inside Ethan unclenched. For the first time in forever, he felt like he belonged. The days passed quickly. Ethan helped Eleanor with chores, carrying water from the well, gathering firewood, and learning the names of the herbs she used for medicine. He and Rex explored the fields together, running freely for the first time in their lives. But even as life settled into a new rhythm, Ethan knew he couldn't hide forever. One morning, as he sat on the front steps, a familiar figure approached, Sheriff Owens. Ethan's heart hammered. The sheriff was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and kind but sharp eyes. "You look better, kid," Owens said, leaning on his cane. "Eleanor's been taking good care of you." Ethan nodded, but he could feel the weight of the conversation coming. Owens sighed, rubbing his chin. "We found your father." Ethan froze. "Alive?" he forced himself to ask. Owens nodded. "Barely." Ethan's stomach twisted. "He won't be coming after you again," Owens added. "Not from a prison cell." A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Ethan let out a shaky breath. It was over. Really, truly over. For the first time, he didn't have to look over his shoulder, didn't have to run, didn't have to be afraid. Rex nuzzled his side, as if sensing his relief. Ethan turned to the sheriff. "What happens now?" Owens smiled. "That's up to you." Seasons changed. Winter gave way to spring, and with it, Ethan changed too. He grew stronger, his frame filling out with regular meals and hard work. He laughed more, no longer flinching at every sudden sound. And Rex was unstoppable. His wounds had healed, but his spirit had never been broken. One day, as Ethan and Rex were out in the village, Owens approached him again. This time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a younger officer, struggling to hold on to a wriggling, energetic puppy. "We need a dog trainer," Owens said with a grin. "And I hear you have a gift." Ethan blinked. "Me?" Owens nodded. "We're starting a K9 unit, and I think you and Rex would be perfect." Ethan looked down at Rex, who was already sniffing at the new puppy, tail wagging. A slow smile spread across his face. A new life, a new purpose. And this time he wasn't alone. He knelt down, scratching behind Rex's ears. "What do you think, buddy? Ready to teach these rookies how it's done?" Rex gave a happy bark. Ethan laughed, a real, full laugh. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. And no matter what the future held, he knew one thing for sure. He and Rex were going to face it together.